welcome. Let's begin. My name is D.A. Navoti, and along with, I'm one of the co-founders of Fight for Our Lives, and along with Ruth O'Fray, the other co-founder who you'll meet in a bit, we welcome you to a special reading in celebration of diversity and anti-racism. And boy, do we need it and do we deserve it? I'm really excited about our lineup tonight and just thematically what we are working on tonight. So again, in celebration of diversity and anti-racism. Our amazing lineup this evening reflects our theme tonight. But before we dive into that, I'd like to open up with a land acknowledgement. On behalf of Fight for Lives, we acknowledge the land on which I stand today, which is Seattle, Washington, as the traditional home of the Coast Salish people, the traditional home of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this dialogue. I ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land and wherever you're tuning in from, as these caretakers are still here. So thank you. So it is a bit bittersweet moment right now to begin this reading because the mission of Fight for Our Lives has focused for the past year on supporting communities targeted by divisive politics. So about over a year ago in late 2019, Ruth and myself were fed up with a news cycle. Little did we know what 2020 will bring. But back then, we knew we could gather artists in the community to combat racism, homophobia, and systemic oppression, just to name a few examples. Hence, Fight for Our Lives was born, where we simultaneously highlight communities targeted by divisive politics, to bring in writers and artists who come from these communities to share their work, and then 3, fundraise for nonprofits who advocate for these communities. So as you can see, let me move forward to our mission. But as you can see from our event list on the left-hand side, in our past events, we've done what we could during the hellish year that is 2020. But prior to the pandemic, and this is what makes this reading bittersweet, is that Ruth and I had always agreed this reading series would be time limited. Specifically, we had planned to end by Inauguration Day, depending on the election, of course. So much to our relief in November, here we are in the oddest of political moments in American history. Odd is probably not the right word, but next week we welcome new political leadership to help us move forward. So this means that tonight is our last event in the series of Fight for Our Lives. So again, it's a very bittersweet moment for Ruth and myself, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your support and for fighting for the lives of others. Speaking of which, our event tonight benefits 2 nonprofits who do amazing anti-racist work. And how the ticketing process will work this evening is that in between readings, we're going to highlight our beneficiary nonprofits, where you'll get to hear a little bit more about their mission and values. Our suggested ticket price is $10, yet we recognize that it might be difficult for some to pay. So please support these organizations in whatever capacity you can, such as signing up for their newsletters and advocating for these nonprofits on social media. But during kind of our mini nonprofit presentations, we'll drop the donation links in the chat box so you can directly contribute to to the organization of your choice. And you can also maybe split that $10, 5 and 5, or go whatever combo you choose. So it's up to you. But with that said, let's kind of warm up here. And I want to kind of foster some community building with a warm-up question I have for all of you. So get your fingers ready for the chat box. So although Fight for Our Lives is ending, how will you advocate for others and continue the fight in 2021? So kind of you can type your hopes, wishes, any efforts that you are leading in your own lives to fight for others. Type in the chat box, but how will you extend the spirit of Fight for Our Lives in your own way and in your own lives? So I'm just kind of curious to, again, foster community building. How will you fight for others in 2021? And as those responses trickle in, oh, we're getting Sonora. Oh, welcome, Sonora. It's good to see you digitally, virtually. And Sonora sharing support the work of my fellow writers of color. Show up. That's a hashtag right there. I love it. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for both of having us involved. Thank you for showing up, y'all. I think the hardest part in these moments is showing up, right? We're fatigued, the year's been pretty rough on us, but I'm also just very thankful that we're here and present and fighting for the lives of others. So as comments trickle in, I actually want to hand off to the other co-founder of Fight for Lives, and also the writer in residence at Hugo House. So everyone, please give a warm welcome for Ruth O'Fray.
Hello, and thank you all so much for coming. We are very excited about this event, even as we are sad that it is our last one. We've got an amazing lineup for you. So I'm going to keep my stuff short because this is not about me. I'm going to introduce our first reader, who is Lena Khalaf Tuffaha. Lena is an Arab American poet, essayist, and translator. Her first book of poems, Water and Salt, won the 2018 Washington State Book Award. She's the author of Arab in Newsland, winner of the 2016 To Sylvia's Chapbook Prize, and Letters from the Interior, finalist for the 2020 Jean Pedrick Chapbook Award. She is the recipient of a 2019 Artist Trust Fellowship and served as the inaugural poet in residence at Open Books, a poem Emporium in Seattle. Shout out Open Books. Her essays and poems have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net, and she has most recently been published in Jubilant, Poetry Northwest, and Southern Humanities Review. Please welcome Lena.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and everyone who is joining us. And thank you to my fellow readers. I'm so excited to hear your words and just be in this space with all of you. Let's see where to begin. I think I'll start with something that's been on my mind recently, and I wish it wasn't always on my mind, but invariably whenever something happens in America that looks messy or complicated and might involve violence, the comparisons to cities that I love and have childhood memories in fly. So you get a lot of like, this is not Beirut. This is not Baghdad, this kind of, and I'm so impressed with the depth of knowledge of Middle Eastern geography that American journalists invariably share when they are trying to make comparisons having to do with collapse. So I have a poem about that. This is from my book, Water and Salt. It's Beirut out here. Today again. Smoke-charred throats, suffocating, the moment we thought nothing of only moments before. The moment we thought was sacred as spring light, filtering through young leaves, shimmering halos above children's heads, along the route, exploded. A sound too large to be heard, a sound the whole body processes. Worse than the noise-canceling, moment-shattering sound when noise returns and the carnage is unleashed in full stereo. Searching for words to center our bodies, our souls in zero gravity. Thankfully, we have no frame of reference. Only metaphors offer rafts in this turbulence. It's Beirut out here, we say. It's Baghdad. We recall the debris and trance of distant foreigners, tragedy outside our own language. From photographs and far away, they stare at us. Today again in Baghdad and at a wedding in Afghanistan, smoke-charred throats, spring light suspended. Before the time-swallowing sound, the moment was sacred. There too, marked hopefully on a calendar. Before they were metaphors, they were someone's city. They were a lover's beach, a weekly market visit, a daily drive home. Before they were victims, before we were victims, we were beloveds. Before you were a survivor, you were someone's light. And I'll read one more from Water and Salt. One of the things that you sometimes miss out on when you don't have a homeland is elegies. And so over many wars and many years, I gathered some of the names of children that I felt hadn't been remembered and hadn't been named in this poem. Mountain Stone. Do not name your daughters Shayma. Courage will march them into the bullet path of dictators. Do not name them Sundus. The garden of paradise calls out to its marigolds, gathers its green leaves up in its embrace. Do not name your children Malak or Ranim. Angels want the companionship of others like them. Their silvery wings trailing the filth of jail cells, the trill of their laughter a call to prayer. Do not name your sons Hamza. Do not taunt the torturer's whip with promises of steadfastness. Do not name your sons Muhammad, Ahed, Zakaria, Ismail. They will become seashells, disappear in the sand. Do not name your children. Let them live nameless, seal their eyelids, and sell their voices to the nightingale. Do not name your children, and if you must, call them by what withstands this endless season of decay. Name them mountains, call them stone. And so I think I'll shift to some newer work. One of the poems that I am proud of from recent years is Golden Shovel. Many of you are familiar with that form, which means that there is a line from another poet that is sort of rivering down the page of this poem. And this is a golden shovel after poet Marwa Hilal, entitled To Grieve for All Your Other Selves. This was published in Cordite Review. Rationing the cumin and the sumac when visitors from home were few and far between, you offered us unadorned fattoush at Maghrib. Your hands move with practiced grace, stirring lemon zest around, but the soup is still bland, no trace of childhood or grandmother, as sad as we were our first Ramadan here alone. Much of what passes for memory is just hunger, taste buds posing as spurned lovers. My body is revolting against what I always assumed would feed me. I no longer have a Lexus for these transformations. What keeps you loyal to your meticulous rituals? Is it too late to learn to recite the words without translating them? Sometimes my single prayer is for forgetting. Given the blade, I would excise the verbs and scar tissue that separate us. The emptiest of all accomplishments is language mastery in the new world, a thing of kaleidoscopic allure and little return on investment. It is a passport, but not a passage. And do we ever pass in an unaccustomed landscape? We're given away by the overstuffed filing cabinets, the certainties of ancestry, the ever-present suitcase. And for those of you who haven't yet read Marwa's work, you absolutely have to check out Invasive Species, which is a magnificent, magnificent book of poems. Let's see, maybe two more short ones. I think, Ruth, do I have time for two more short ones? Okay. This is a poem that was recently published in Jacquard Press, and it has a fun story. This is a memory of driving around Tampa during AWP with a bunch of Arab American poets. So you have to be careful when you hang out with other poets, because anything you say or do might end up in a poem. Dendrology. We are 5 in the van, 3 of us Southerners, or maybe 2. 1 has migrated west. Americans now, our shoes and our proclivities indicate, practitioners of liminal freedoms. We can identify and describe what will undo us. We upend our stories with bilingual euphemisms. One recalls the curses of a father. Another reenacts his child's slippage between words, mother tongue and moment. What kinds of trees are these, I ask, noting the lacy canopies that shade the sidewalks. It is engineered to look accessible. the American city, the distance from one to another in this country. We know our names are gray zone enough to invite exercises of classification. They may or may not be oak, though one of us doubts, lists the qualities of bark, of leaves. Likely pecans, a southerner suggests, recalls a childhood neighbor's front yard tree. Years ago, my mother confided, as we drove north past a pleat of snow-capped cedars, some mornings, I imagine it all returned, asphalt pulled up with our structures and transgressions undone. We are always learning the original names of trees. And I'll close with a poem from my most recent chapbook, Letters from the Interior, which was published in 2019 by Diode Press. And I'll just say that among the things that have anchored me in this time, certainly poems are at the top of the list, and just the work of artists. And so I'm so grateful for the company of all these magnificent artists here today. And to anyone who's watching or listening and feeling as we all do and have, bereft at various points, I hope that you find the words to anchor you. Morning Lantern. Miss Sahar had spoken of this sister, asbaha, morning verb. And as she spoke, a sun had risen over her words. It was the most arduous lesson, one that required a tearing apart at the seams, a loosening of crimson thread cross-stitched in 7-branch cedars and rows of eglantine. To have become. More than the desolate stretches of perseverance, more than the eternally flowering fields of Cannes. To have become. Full fathoms of night traversed, and then a light upon the corrugated metal and slumped rooftops of the camp, gilding the limestone of what was, or bluing it from sight entirely. To have become. To pass from one form into another, chrysalis dwellers finally cutting the wind with our own wings. Asbaha, sister of the earliest hours. From the edge of sky, a call to the smallest prayer, and the sunbirds chorusing, their feathers flashing sapphire, flashing emerald, and Feiruz on the radio, her longing and the day's headlines dissolved in our coffee cups. To have become. To sunder a sorrow from our bodies and rise to soft, unburned wicks, to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. That was gorgeous, stunning. I mean, I feel like I need all of the words to talk about how beautiful that was. Here is Lena's information again. Lena, if you are comfortable for a few moments, just talk about what you're going to be fighting for in the future.
Oh, thank you. So I would like in my lifetime or my children's lifetime for it to be normal for me to get on a plane and fly home to Palestine. Just, that simple sentence without all the caveats and complications that now are associated with it. And that's what I'm always fighting for. And I'm going to continue fighting for that, not only because that's what I wish for myself and all Palestinians, but because it's Palestine that has taught me everything I know about social justice and anti-racism. And it's that lens of Palestine that I know the world through. And so it's just, humbling and an honor to be serving that cause any way I can. So that's my hope. And the Biden administration is going to give me plenty of things to fight about. So I'm going to be busy for a while.
Well, we all are. Well, thank you again, everybody. Buy Lena's books, check out more of her stuff published online. I'm sure you can get everything at Open Books or Elliott Bay or your local bookstore. Thank you so much for joining us, Lena. That was incredible.
Check out on my end. Thank you so much. And moments like this makes me wish I was cool enough to be a poet. I'm not, but that's the magic of poetry that I'm always jealous of. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, let's go ahead and welcome our next reader, and that's going to be Ramon Isao. Ramon Isao is a recipient of the Tim McGinnis Award for Fiction, as well as fellowships from Artist Trust and Jack Straw Cultural Center. His work appears in the Iowa Review, Ninth Letter, Hobart, Moss, and his screenplay credits include Zombies of Mass Destruction. Wonder what that's about. Dead Body and the web series Grow Up, in which he also co-stars. He has an MFA from Columbia University and serves as fiction editor at New Orleans Review. Everyone, please welcome Ramon.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's amazing that this many people would show up to a reading. And there are so many familiar faces that I was like looking at a yearbook. I swear to God. I'm so glad you're all here. Thank you so much for coming. All right. So listen, I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to read a story that takes place a couple generations in the future, as I kind of sometimes in my most cynical or maybe least cynical moments see it. And so just a couple of things to explain that in this future, we've got, instead of phones, we've got neuros. So they're like in our heads now, because basically that's what they are already. We got, due to climate change, like we've moved a little further down the line due to global climate change. And racial segregation seems to be at a much higher and worse level. All right, so that said, this is called The Last Tree on Earth. I was 7 when my father took me to see it. Back then it was nearly a grove. You could stand in the center of those trees and imagine what it must have been like. Shafts of light pierced the canopy and beams I kept trying to cup in my hands. Ranger Ronnie was our tour guide. He told all of us to close our eyes and take a big whiff. What did we smell? We told him sweat. We told him wet soil. Kids with enough money for synthetic lawns shouted out grass, mushrooms. Ranger Ronnie said that that was the smell of a tree breathing. And when he asked us to close our eyes and breathe along with the tree for a full minute, I stole my chance. I reached over the ropes to run my fingers over the bark, and I'm telling you, it communicated. Straight into my body came the weight of everything that tree and I had gone through to be there together. Well, Ronnie caught me stroking bark and yelled at me. Dad got a notice from the Parks Department demanding a fine. He smiled as he paid for it over the phone, though. Best money I ever spent, Mijito, he told me. I'd like my son Tomio to have a shot at a memory like that. I think he needs it. He's got that constant anxiety all the kids have now. I don't want to blame the neurochips, nor my ex-wife for convincing me to install Tomio's. But these neuros constantly top you off with the latest looming dangers of the world, articles, videos of all the things you could be called upon to survive, from earthquakes to shootings to cruel acts of legislature. And think of the advancements to come. Example, the latest update has a behavioral chip all the parents swore we would never install. And then last week during drop-off, in comes Tran, normally this sullen slump of a boy, now dressed and primped and straight of back. His father couldn't look a single one of us in the eye. So I call us both in sick and rent a car. It's gonna cost me, but I can always eat less when he's at his mom's next month. At the eastern checkpoint of the oxygen dome, the guard waves me through the airlock, out onto that 2-lane highway, through a perennial storm of swirling reds and tans. Tomio looks up only once from that video game, but then he pauses and I know he's checking our location. The tree's in Dome D, he says. It is. That's white territory. So? Whites hate us. No, they don't, I say, but then I add, or at least it's more complicated than that. I don't want to see the stupid tree. I heard it's a big stick. Hey, I say, if a white dad and his son drove down a highway in our dome, would you hurt them? A promising silence. Son, it's 30 minutes. Dad, it's a stick. And that's when the car interrupts us. There's an obstruction ahead. We slow to an idle. At first, there's nothing but the same unending bloom of red and brown clouds, and then from those dust clouds emerge the flashing hazards of another car on its side. I slow the car by half as we pass. It's the same make and model as ours, crumpled like an old beer can, freshly abandoned. The car routes us around it. Not a living thing stirs. And then the wrecked door opens. A thin figure in a bright white dust suit crawls out and comes running. I tell the car to pull over and my son completely changes. His joints lock and he stops breathing. His mouth moves, but I can't hear a sound. Louder, I tell him. This time I hear him. Don't, he says. The word, the thing he wants me to do just sits there in the car with us. Mijo, we have to. That's not true. People barely use this road. There's no aid stations. We're needed. I can see it rising out of Tomio, that fear. That fear will make mistakes for him. He'll open the door. He'll run to the storm. I know he will. And then he says it outright, I'll run. The stranded guy is close enough now that I can make out 2 words he's shouting, even through his helmet. Thank you, over and over again, just like that. Thank you. But there is an animal in Tomio now. It stretches his face into impossible feats of anguish and loss. His is a sorrow I can't sit next to. I'm weak that way. My dad was too. My mind begins to see what the kid sees. I see all the things this bigger person could do to me. And then I see a few of the things that they could do to Tomio, and that's when I decide to keep driving. It feels like something I can't help, but that's an excuse. I love my son far too much. That's the truer excuse. And now the stranded motorist I should be saving is close enough to touch the bumper. I tell the car to move onward, and I'm shocked when it does, as if somehow the car would know better. I figure the worst part of the whole encounter is how long the guy runs after us before the dust swallows him up, but I'm wrong. The worst part is that within 60 seconds, Tomio's back to his video game. My mother was the tough one. One compliment from her equaled a dozen of my father's. She was Hugo Perez, the last concert pianist famous enough to fill theaters. You can't blame her for wedging that piano under my fingers too. This is what it took to crack my mother, the first AI program to write songs that made people cry. You know them all. Only Ours and Heart Obeys. You know them better than you know the name Hugo Perez. Call it snobbery, but those songs have the same chemical tang that all the food has now. So we lobbied, picketed. We made videos begging to keep music human. But after Velvet State came out, music as a human endeavor ended. Mom wrote out a few more years of dwindling crowds and then stopped playing entirely. I tried keeping it up, but it was wrong not having her notes over in the next room intermingle with mine from the living room. It seemed pointless, like talking on the phone to someone who'd already switched off. The visitor center has changed. The tree now is housed under a translucent dome at the end of a long outdoor corridor where visitors stand in line. Ceiling screens project footage of an overhead canopy. It's like looking up at a real forest. White students on field trips stare up with a wonder that borders on mourning. Ragged pilgrims raise their arms up at the false canopy and sing Be the Tree, which is an AI song, Pilgrims, by the way. Their voices are so hoarse it hurts my throat to hear them. Loudspeakers announce the safety rules, stay in line, don't touch the foliage, and also thank you, because all of this has been funded by visitors like you. The thank you is noticeably louder than the rest of the message. They must be having financial troubles. They've even started renting space out for other events. A sign back at the entrance directs patrons to go left for the Last Tree exhibit and right for the Rhonda Johns Memorial Service. The front of the line reveals another big change. Now you circle the tree on a round conveyor belt. It's exactly like a baggage carousel from back when airports were still in use, except there's this great mound of soil in the center, covered by a thick glass dome. Under the far end of that dome stands the last tree. Even from here, I can see it's a black, shrunken stick about 3 meters high, stripped of the bark I once ran my fingers over. Fungal clumps take hold of its last few branches, weighing them down like fattened birds. On top of that, the piped-in fragrance of tree breath is fake, plus Ranger Ronnie turns out not to be a real person, but a kind of mascot for the whole joint. Every tour guide here is named Ranger Ronnie. Ours is Ranger Ronnie Tanya, a grandmother of 4 with a stern smile. She tells us you get 3 revolutions, no touching, and we start circling. That's when I noticed that where the belt passes the tree, there's an opening in the dome so that you and the tree can be in each other's immediate presence for just a moment. Every child's mouth is open as they pass. Some sniff. Pilgrims collapse in joy or sorrow, I can't tell which. It's quiet, except for the nature soundtrack, chirping and breezing from unseen speakers. It almost feels like being in a forest, but it also feels like taking a conveyor belt to see a mushroom, and Tomio knows it. I told you, he says, a stick. We drift closer to the open portion of the dome. I start to smell its mossy, dying breaths. Tomio, I say, on the next revolution, I want you to poke it once. They'll arrest us, he says. They won't. They'll separate us, he says. They won't. We pass the tree a second time, and he keeps his hands tight to his sides, so I grab him by the wrists. In my defense, all he has to do is reach out one little finger. No one will see. But that fear is inside of him. I can smell it more clearly than I smell my own son. The tree approaches for the 3rd time. He's in tears now. I have driven my son to tears. You're hurting me, he says, less in protest than shock. And that shock explodes when I pick him up. The animal comes back into him. Instead of a boy, there is a flailing in my arms, but I manage to extract his right hand from the storm of limbs and steady it. I am steadying my boy. We near the tree, its final exhalations making syrup of the air around us, and my kid is screaming into my cupped hand as I worm his fingers out of his fists and offer them up like a sacrifice, with no concern for his safety or even his ability to breathe. But the fear is stronger than me, and the kid wriggles out of my hand, and then Ranger Ronnie Tanya is there. She tells me touching the tree is now a misdemeanor, 3 to 6 months minimum, and on, her voice rising like a tide until it starts to get racist. I'd argue back, but her skin is an undefeated counter-argument. It's a stalemate older than the country, so I turn back to Tomio only to find that he's gone. You know that feeling of your children being gone, not left, right, up, or down, only air in place of a kid? And then that air starts to waver like it's over a hot road, and I'm saying his name loud like a man who's never heard it before. I've lost track of time entirely, and now Tomio is gone, but then an alarm sounds and stops, a fire exit door slipping open and shut. I follow fire exit signs to the fire door, shoulder it open. Beige sunlight blinds me. I take a few steps forward, and right before I call out Tomio's name, my eyes adjust. And there in front of me is a huge crowd of Ranger Ronnies in full Ronnie regalia, sitting on rows of folding chairs in the staff parking lot, every one of them white. It takes a half second to shake off the sensation of dreaming and another half second to notice the makeshift stage they're all crying at. And owning every inch of that stage is a bone-thin woman, obviously about to die. A banner over the old woman reads, "We'll remember you always, Ranger Ronnie Rhonda." Only then do I remember the sign back at the entrance. I am at the Rhonda Johns Memorial Service. Rhonda herself introduces a pianist. Her voice is all sugar and gravel. The crowd cries and watches and cries. Hardly the place to bolt down center aisle, whispering for Tomio, but I do. Luckily, most eyes are on the pianist. He's got an actual upright wooden piano up there, but he's crying too hard to play. Finally, he gives up, weeps into his knees. So Ronnie moves on. Remembrances. Give me something to take into the next world. I was a Ronnie like y'all in life. I'm a Ronnie after. Ranger Ronnie Jason, you go first. And there's Tomio, up front, aisle seat. He must have run far enough for the panic to wear off, and now he's stuck front row at a stranger's impending death. When I sit next to him, he hugs me, blubbering out apologies I shush with my own. Meanwhile, Ranger Ronnie Jason can barely pull it together, sits down. Next is Ronnie Candace, then a civilian called Grace. And that's around the time I realize that the remembrances are coming my way, like some somber wave at a basketball game. Only 4 seats away, now 3. Son, I whisper, I don't want to ruin these people's ceremony. Head for the car, but it's too late. They found me. The last 2 must have just said thanks or something, the fucking assholes. I should do the same. Thank you, Ranger Ronnie Rhonda, and leave. But sitting there with my son safe in my arms, I can't go. Gratitude is such a strange emotion. And there is Rhonda on that stage, fated for the needle, gesturing hopefully at me to share, to please share. So I stand up. I head for the stage, Tomio's hand in mine. I sit us both on the piano bench. When the grooves of my fingerprints touch the keys, I'm surprised to find them warm, and even more surprised when I start to play. I play it real nice. It's filled with the years I haven't performed, and it's filled with my son, my ex, my father, my mother. I hope it is exactly what Ronnie wanted. I can feel the crowd feeling it. The piano warbles in and out of tune, hitting several notes at the same time in a way that makes the music feel ancient, which it is and always will be. And Tomio, he's never seen me play. I guess I've always been too ashamed to show him this thing I wasted half my life trying to master. But the instant my fingers coax music from those keys, his mouth shoots so far open I can hear his jaw crack. Little hands reach for mine, but he thinks better of it. Instead, he trawls his gaze from my fingers up my arms to my shoulders and my face and back again, like he's trying to figure out a magic trick. It's as if I'm doing something impossible, as if I've brought some dead thing back to life. Thank you all so much. It was so awesome to read to you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here and everything.
Dang, Ramon. Let's show some appreciation in that chat box. When you hear a good reading, your brain consciousness is in that scene still, but your senses are adjusting and going back to the real world, unfortunately. I'm caught in that moment right now, Ramon, but as I'm kind of transitioning on my end and getting my bearings back, what is something that you are going to fight for in 2021? What's something worth championing, advocating for on your end?
That's really hard. I don't know. There's so many things to fight for. There are so many fights. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't really have a very good answer, but I guess to some extent, I'd really like, and I don't know how to do this, but I think the thing that most frustrates me these days is the fact that I don't know, it's like people have difficulty discerning fact from fiction a lot, and that since we're all kind of fed our own personal version of the internet that just sort of reifies all the things that we already believe in, I don't know what to do about that, but that's definitely a thing that makes every other discourse difficult and toxic and poisonous, that you can't even, it's so difficult to even discern fact or to prove to someone that some obvious fiction is false. What to do about that, I don't know, but that's probably one of my greatest frustrations right now in this moment.
And I'm sure all of us can definitely relate. And in the spirit of community sharing, if folks have ideas they will want to share with Ramon and everyone else, please do so in the chat box. We want to keep this as a conversation, though we know Zoom is limited. But thank you so much, Ramon. I really do appreciate you lending your talent for this cause. So again, everyone, let's just show some appreciation. Thank you so much for those powerful words in that story. Okay, all right, so I'm getting my bearings back, and let's transition to actually talking about our first beneficiary nonprofit. And I'm really privileged to talk about, or at least introduce Solid Ground. They do great community work here. And as you can see from their mission, they work to end poverty and undo racism and other oppressions that are root causes of poverty. Solid Ground envisions a community beyond poverty and oppression where all people have equitable opportunity to thrive. To kind of give you a little bit more detail on what that mission might look like in action, I'm really pleased to welcome a former Fight for Our Lives reader who participated in one of our Black Lives Matter readings this past summer. Jelena, are you out there in the Zoom world?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you so much and welcome back. And I appreciate you actually talking about this organization. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it to you to explain the great things that Solid Ground does.
Thank you, DA. Wow, like that reading so far, the event has just been amazing, but that just leaves me with such a appreciation for being able to connect with people this way. But as far as Solid Ground goes, so I am on the communications team at Solid Ground. And just a little bit of background as far as how we came along. The organization started out as a food bank up in the Fremont neighborhood of Seattle and has grown into an kind of like multi-pronged agency that delivers services across the entirety of King County and does some advocacy level work as well for the state. So typically we like to look at poverty in a holistic way and really acknowledge that a lot of people experience poverty in a lot of different ways. So that includes having food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation insecurity. All of those things kind of result in very unique experiences for people. So, and our anti-racism work plays into that because that is both a symptom of this being in low income brackets and not being able to make ends meet, but also a kind of root cause of the work. And so it's really very cyclical. And we try to acknowledge that in the delivering services to people. So we're always kind of looking to plug into just with other organizations and with people just trying to do good work. This past year during COVID, we've seen a lot of people step up to really kind of take on action and drive change in the neighborhood. So if you're interested in connecting further, you can always reach out and I will do my best to connect you with the right people. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jelena. And folks, I went ahead and put the donation link in the chat box. So if you want to donate your suggested ticket price, you can do so there. And then also they have a great PDF brochure about their work with anti-racism. So take a look at that. But Jelena, thank you so much for your support and not only with just reading for Black Lives Matter events last summer, but also contributing and expanding our knowledge on this amazing organization. So thank you so much, Jelena. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna let Ruth introduce our next reader.
Thank you. Yes, our next reader is Rob Arnold. He is a Chamorro poet whose work has appeared in Ploughshares, Hyphen, Gettysburg Review, Poetry Northwest, Red Ink, Yes Poetry, the Ocean State Review, Peripheries, and the Volta, among others. His poems have been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and have received support from the Somerville Arts Council, the Jack Straw Cultural Center, and Artist Trust. You probably know him from the community as the Hugo House event director. On a personal note, he's a dear friend of mine and a colleague at Hugo House, and I am so glad that we are able to see him in his poet form today, his true form, after he spends so much of his time and energy organizing for the community. So Rob, take it away.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Ruth. Yes, my true form. I never think of it that way, but I'm so glad to be here as a poet. And thank you to you and Dan for hosting this just really incredible series and putting the spotlight on organizations that are doing powerful work in the community. So thank you to the two of you, and thank you to my fellow readers. I am not ready to follow Ramon and Lena's readings, but I will try. I have just 3 poems for you tonight. And the first poem, they're sort of one shorter and 2 longer ones. And the first poem, gosh, after seeing the events of last week unfold, it's, it reminded me of an earlier moment where, we just saw racist id kind of play out on the television screen. So this is a poem called 4th of July. 4th of July. We held the fire in our hands. We watched the churches burn on the news each night, held the memories in our hands, held the silences, their emptiness. We were braiding the sky with flame. We were listening for the cry, bodies bleeding out in the street. The night was a hunger, swallowing despair, desperation, and always the strange colonies of cloud overhead, time speaking in tongues. We were driving right into the storm. We were asleep at the wheel or aiming the Father's gun, halting thought with our own blood. We were childless. We were ourselves children, waiting for the flash and the still, for eternities of light, the star in our eyes, for the simple, impossible brilliance and afterimage billowing out as we were thrust into our secret dark. The face of the pastor killed in Charleston on every screen again. No one escapes. No one remembers. We're all in the end frightened and alone, holding the fire in our hands. And this next poem is a new poem. It is, and it owes a debt of gratitude to Matilda Bernstein Sycamore. And those of you who've read her new book, The Freezer Door, will immediately recognize the reference. It's called An Ice Cube is a Body. An ice cube is a body. Like all things, it begins as water and ends as water. As water, it may become vapor, steam droplets on a window, a heaviness in the air we bring into our lungs. It may become dew or dog piss in the grass, a body's nourishment or excreta. Residue from the time when it once had a body, from a time when we too had bodies, embodiments of the air we breathed, when we were ourselves bodies, when we would breathe in one another's company, could feel the warmth and take it in ourselves, as though it were ours to own, as though we become the vapor ourselves, and the world as vaporous as this empty park, fogged in November, as the gray smoke of an animal at stride, which itself was a body at the edge of shadow, the body of smoke streaking the abandoned ballpark, a creature of smoke, creature from creare via creatura, a thing created, a residue of creation gliding the field, parting reality as it went. And we were also that smoke, my dog and me, witnessing a promise dragged in the creature's wake. It moved as though inevitable, as though a piece of one dark had broken off to join another. And somewhere along the tree line, we joined that darkness with it, our consciousness like a mist that trailed in its wake, trailed from our minds as though somehow without us, as though these fields slathered in dew and the piss of dogs had condensed into a fog that we then breathed in, the creature, my dog, and myself. This fog, even the streetlights struggled to pierce, which joined with the heat in our lungs as we exhaled and became a lonesomeness overtaking us all. And the more alone we became, the more we steamed outward, as this ice might steam in its tray with the freezer door open. And isn't a city in November an ice about to form? Doesn't it all go back to zero in the end, as all things must? Born in the tray, the ice comes to rest in the glass. This very glass with the gin and the lime wedge, this glass that I held 20 years ago when the future felt like a promise, motherless but possible, which has become instead this year of pestilence, of abandonment, of the late night YouTube videos of newly christened freighters sliding off their blocks, crashing heavily off blocks into the shipbuilder's canal, which I'll always consider a kind of birth. All that tremor and fulfillment, all that welded steel bobbing in the channel, perfect gibbous of water breaking over the banks. Because even an ice cube once had a mother, once cradled in the protection of the tray, just as I, twice unmothered, was once a body grown in another's, immersed in the waters produced by a body, a little condensation of cells and potential, now drinking to forget, or drinking to encounter a version of the self as a smoke drifting the tree line, as a fleeting streak in the night, which will come to stillness at some point, either violently or in peace, either witnessed or unseen, and release its waters once more into the vast rippling pelt of the earth. That one had a bit of a epiphanic animal in it, so I hope you were prepared for it. This next poem is a meditation on, I guess, a little bit about identity and about the Pacific and about the militarization of the Pacific. My people are from the Marianas Islands, Guam and Rota and Saipan, etc. So this is a poem called Pearl. The raw pearl my mother gave to me, that I gave to you. I carry it sometimes in my dreams, its memory swelling like a blister, forged from the blood of the Pacific, little grain, little ache on the tongue. If you held it in your mouth, it would be smooth, semen-colored, embryonic. If you swallowed, it would slide down to the belly and take root there, the way I did once, niggling child listing an amnion, lumped silica smoothed to a sheen. If you were to hold the mollusk in your hand, place a knife at the base of the hinge. In this way, the shell, misshapen pearl, can be pried open, separated from the meat there. There's a taste of salty mucus, of rusted nails. Can you detect the fecal bloom of the oyster beds? The pearl of shit building in the lower tracks, blushing microbiome of the tides? Can you taste the life draining from the animal, the waters that flowed through, what was sifted and what remained, what chipped at the shell to release its tumorous iridescence? Can you siphon the past into gems, all the residues draining from sewers, dead leviathans clustered with hagfish, bodies of fishermen and sailors, their mother's grief engulfed by the sea? My own mother returned decades too late to hand me this pearl, uneven thing with its own kind of potential. Her island crusted layer by layer from the sea, magma turned igneous, string of pearls draped on the Mariana Trench. Could she look east as a child and see a fire blooming in the nacreous skies over Bikini Atoll? Did she think of a pearl? On whose sons did the fallout rain? Whose daughters, pearls growing deep in their bodies? I think of the daughters never born to me, who will never receive this small, insignificant inheritance. Rough pearl in a plastic envelope from a highway gift shop in Hawaii. If you were to break it open and magnify the shards, they would appear structured, highly brittle, mineral platelets stacked like long boxes in a darkened warehouse. Warehouse of forgotten lives, of dead ancestors, lost mothers and children. Little speck little star disappearing in the folds of your hand? What does the light do as it arcs along the silken surface? What if all homelands are grains scattered in the sea? Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
That was amazing. Your true form shining through. Rob, if you could just take a moment and talk about some of the things that you're going to be fighting for in 2021 and beyond.
Oh my gosh, well, I think, first of all, the events of last week have shown that, it's not going to matter that a new administration has been elected, that we all need to keep fighting, that the tides of, racism and of, I don't even know, violence are running deep. And so we need to all fight. A lot of you also know that Hugo House is going through a transformational change right now, going to, trying to undo the harms that it's done in the past and become a more anti-racist organization. And I want to fight for Hugo House, and I want to fight for all of you out there who, a lot of you have connections with Hugo House, so I want to fight for all of you as well. So.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very excited for what is in store in those changes at Hugo House, and I'll be right alongside you. Okay, so let's take a little break here as we transition away from that amazing poetry to just do another little question for the audience. Drop into the chat any resources you have found useful about any of the kinds of issues we've been talking about, anything that's important to you. Feel free to interpret that as you will. I know that people have been sharing links already. So whatever you think would be helpful for anyone who comes across it, please feel free to share. As you do that, we'll transition over to our next amazing reader, Cassidy Dyce, who I'm so excited to get to introduce you all to. This is her first reading, not to put her on the spot, but I predict she's going to smash it. So let me read her bio. She's just so amazing. Cassidy Dyce is a native of Ashburn, Virginia, and moved to Seattle after earning her Bachelor of Arts in English at Christopher Newport University. In 2018, she continued her studies of literature and writing overseas by matriculating at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. Currently, she works as the writer's assistant to New York Times bestselling author Kwame Alexander. Her work has appeared on NPR's Morning Edition and the child show Wordplay with Kwame Alexander. She's also excited to accept the 2020 to 2021 Hugo House Fellowship, where she's working on completing her manuscript, Caricature. As a writer, she seeks to shine a brighter light on issues that confront minorities. Her goal is to foster literary inclusivity on a global scale while addressing struggles that exist among Black communities and other underrepresented constituencies. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with Cassidy so far this year and the fellowship as the writer in residence, and I'm very excited for what she's going to read. Cassidy, take it away.
Yay! Okay, honestly, thank you guys so much for having me. As you said, this is my first reading. I'm super excited and I'm super nervous. Just because of how I was trained, I do want to start out with just saying, once again, thank you. Thank you to my Virginia friends and family who are on. I know it's past your bedtime. Thank you for my mentors. Thank you, Ruth. And mostly thank you, my Hugo House Fellows, who've literally been through this road with me and just taken my nerves and just been there for me as a friend. Today, I'm actually going to read the first chapter of my work in progress, Caricatures. I think it's very fitting. I really hope you guys enjoy it. I've worked very, 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 very hard on it. The white lab coat gave him away. This time he waited outside of my class. He sat perpendicular to the door on the cushioned chair by the window, gripping a biology textbook that covered his face. You see, he no longer hid the fact that he was following me. My throat clogged as I gulped for air and ducked my head to my chest. I darted for the stairs. Maybe I could escape this once. I grabbed the wooden banister and flew down the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time. It wasn't until I reached the ground floor that I noticed his coat flicker from the corner of my eye. He caught me. Fear weighed down my body as I quickened my pace. I just needed to make it to the cafe, the White Elephant. I rudely pushed past other students towards the door. Once again, Once outside, the Alabama February chill ruffled through my coat, but it didn't cool my nerves. I looked over my shoulder to catch a glimpse. Like the last time, he wore his bulky goggles to cover his face, only displaying his thin lips. He was doing it again, toying with me like we were playing a game of cat and mouse, never coming too close but never far. He was calm and in control, as if he was a regular student on his way to class and not the same man who had been following me for weeks. At first, I wondered if he was a figment of my imagination, if my mentality finally cracked from my time at Crosby. But sometimes as he walked, he'd bump into other students who acknowledged his realness. I pulled on my backpack straps and pushed myself in the cluster of students as if they could be my shield. The White Elephant Cafe was only a few hundred feet away. The red brick building suddenly looked like a glowing asylum. The group of students decluttered and thin, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. I toyed with the idea of making a break for it, running as fast as I could towards my next destination. But I didn't want to attract attention to myself. He was my personal nightmare. He kept his distance like a vulture. I could feel his hot breath on my neck, his outstretching hand closing the gap between us, like he was wanting something of mine. The whiteness of his coat was suffocating, and his looming footsteps threatened my freedom. My body tensed as I closed in on the brick building. I was so close. I wondered when he'd finally attack, when his stalking would turn into assault. Was today that day? Goosebumps covered my body as I passed the quad and reached for the door handle. But suddenly, hands grabbed my shoulders and pulled me off my course. My body reacted before my mind had the chance to strategize with logic. I bit on my lower lip, crushed my eyes closed, and pushed on the force that grabbed me. Whoa, Zora! At the sound of Foster's voice, I immediately recoiled, pulled my hands back into my chest. Foster Flowers stood before me, his hands up defensively. I didn't mean to scare you like that. But I didn't register his words because the man in the white coat smoothly slipped past Foster and entered the cafe. He didn't mutter an excuse me, nor did he look up as he passed. Hello, Zora, Foster said, waving his hand in my face. My breath hitched and I returned my attention to him. I'm sorry. I ran my fingers through my braids and shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. He was gone. I was safe. I followed him inside. We grabbed seats in the corner, and as Foster settled, my eyes scurried around the room, but he was nowhere in sight. The cafe was busier than usual, especially on a Friday night, a side effect of the upcoming final season. Students were arm in arms, back curved over textbooks, pens tapped on the side of tables, with heads scratching and pencil gnawing over problems that couldn't be answered. Man, that last stat test really fucked me up, Foster said, shoveling his duffel bag under the table and placing his book bag in his lap. He shuffled through and passed on his tattered notebook and textbook. His textbook pages were stuffed with papers, probably old homework assignments and tests. Coffee stain decorated the cover of his notebook. Messiness was a part of his charm. I'm hella nervous about that final, though. That's what I'm here for, I reminded him, feeling my heartbeat begin to slip back into its normal rhythm. He flashed me a quick smile, a shining light against his moonlit skin. And in that smile, for less than a second, I forgot the man in the white lab coat. He peeled open his textbook, looking for the latest exam. I watched him while he searched. For someone who stood tall at 6'2", he always seemed to pull into himself, as if to make his appearance smaller. He wore his basketball switch with the university logo and mascot proudly across his chest. Crosby University outlined in gray and blue, the school's color. Under the letters was the gorilla mascot. He was trapped in a cage, baring his teeth, begging to be freed. His mighty hands gripping the bar and his angry eyes reflected the anger I had for our school. I attended Crosby for the notoriety and stayed for the possibilities. Praise surrounded me from teachers, staff, and jealous peers as I shuffled down the high school hallways. The congratulations were never to my face, but it was always in my ear. Whispers and gossip about how I received the golden ticket. I, the girl who sat in the back of the class and always the first to finish a test because I studied weeks prior. While everyone scattered to the rickety bleachers for our basketball team that was bound to lose, I poured a cup of caffeinated tea for another strenuous night of studying for the SATs. When girls grouped together like clumped hair in the bathroom for prom, I bled out my red pen for re-editing my college essay. When the acceptance letter arrived from Crosby, I did not celebrate, nor did I cry. It felt like more of a rite of passage than a reason for celebration. I didn't gloat or puff my chest when I wore my new Crosby sweater during the rainy days in Maryland. But I did feel something new, something that took 4 years of hard work to achieve. Attention. The dark-skinned, reserved girl with the darker circles and the darker eyes had been the only student to be accepted into the prestigious Crosby. My school didn't know my name, but they knew what I had accomplished. And at first, recognition felt good, but it wasn't what I needed. I grabbed the textbook and flipped to a fresh piece of paper to find some problems for him to answer. My pencil danced across the blank sheet. It was hard to ignore the nods of acknowledgments, the flapping winks, the pounds on the chest, and the good luck wishes Foster received for just being him. There you go. I closed the textbook and slipped the paper in front of him. I tried to make it resemble your last assignment, so the same type of problems, just different answers. He took a deep breath and rolled up his sleeves, scanning the questions before attempting to answer. I rested my chin in my hands, watching him. Secretly, I enjoyed watching him. College promised to be the best 4 years of my life. I dreamt of the girl I could be, losing myself among sweaty bodies inside of college parties filled with drunk gossip, waking up in a stranger's bed after a forgettable night and escaping to share the details with a roommate over a sloppy breakfast. A fresh freshman year turned into a solitude sophomore year that led to my jarring junior year. With my senior year's conclusion, I counted the days until I could be free of this academic hell. Okay, check it. He slipped the paper back to me. I clicked my red pen and started drifting through his work. It took me 1.5 years of tutoring before I was able to understand his chicken scratch. I scanned the answers, making red marks through every question. That bad, huh? He said sheepishly. Math doesn't come naturally, it takes practice. I succumbed to my urge to provide him comfort. Especially to an English major like me, he groaned dramatically and pressed his head on the tabletop. His long arm cushioned his fall, his fingers draping over the side. His thumb lightly touched my raincoat. He looked up from the crook of his arm. If I fail this test next Friday, coaches said he's gonna bench my ass. They're not gonna bench you. I rolled my eyes, but remained still. My attention belonged to the placement of his curled thumb. Oh yeah? How do you know that, Z? Another nickname that lacked originality, but sounded fresh when he said it. Because they need you. You clean up the rest of the teammates' messes. Foster straightened his back and chewed to digest my words. Then his thick brown lips turned up in the corner. Them white boys really can't play, can they? Before I could catch myself, a laugh boiled from my throat and projected loudly. Foster joined in with me. Though he was a year younger than me, I loved the caliber of our friendship. It was smooth and easy like butter dripping off a hot pancake, pure but authentic, something foreign in the halls of Crosby. Sometimes I wonder if Crosby would have been more bearable if Foster and I shared more than just a droplet of time together, crammed at a small table with books, pencils, and pens to separate us. But that wasn't possible because I had to share him with the rest of the school. On Saturday nights during the winter semester, Foster's poster rose over the campus like a statue, announcing the upcoming basketball season and their projected wins because of their star boy, Foster Flowers. But I didn't like him for the man under the court lights, but because he followed the rule. The rule that my mother ingrained in my head before I learned to address my elders by yes ma'am and no sir. The rule was to acknowledge another Black person whenever you're the minority. In a grocery store, in a park, during a concert, it remained the same. It was Crosby's lack of diversity. It was easy to feel like a black rose amongst white lilies planted in the wrong garden. Crosby shared similarities to my high school, but at least at Crosby I had Foster. Let's just try it again. I laid out more problems on a paper for him. For the next few minutes, we passed the paper back and forth, correcting his answers and questions. With the end of our session neared, I felt the looming return of my soured mood. We'll pick this back up next week. I returned his textbook to him and he stretched his arm over his head as if finishing an intense workout. Then he pulled his backpack from under the table and brought it into his lap, piling his things back inside. Man, I wish I could see you more than just once a week. My grade is counting on you. I told you I'd be willing to give you a free session. Nah, I can't cheat you like that, he winked. Books and binders pushed against the fabric of his backpack, but in the front pocket a small piece of paper poked out. It was a little flyer with the words Black students bold on the front. The remaining words could not be seen. Hey, what's... But before I could finish my question, a proclaimed, prominent voice spoke over mine. Hey, Flowers! We both looked in the direction of the name calling. Lee Roberts, a senior on the basketball team, gestured towards Foster. He wore matching sweats with him and his trailed through the cafe towards us. Yo, we gotta head over to practice soon, he said when he approached. The word yo sounded foreign on his tongue, like he was trying a new language as a beginner. I'm finishing up. Lee, do you know Zora? She's been helping me with some of my studies. His eyes flickered to me like a match, as if something caught his eye by accident, but he did not deserve to hold his attention. Hi, he said dryly and turned his attention to the star at the table. I didn't grace him with a response back. Lee wasn't as tall as Foster, but he was stocky. Where Foster stepped away from the spotlight, Lee demanded it. His tufts of blonde hair stood at the top of his head, and his sides were cut short. Some found his blue eyes striking, like my roommate Harper, but I considered them dangerous. Lee looked impatiently as Foster finished collecting his things. When Foster got to his feet, he went to wave goodbye to me, but Lee threw his arm over his shoulder and led him towards the door. There's Zeus, Lee cried, pointing at Zeus walking into the cafe with his matching sweats and duffel over his shoulder. Zeus was the other black boy on the team, but didn't play as much as Foster. He was my age, but he lived in Foster's shadow. Once the three were together, Lee wrapped his free arm around Zeus and directed them out the door. But he didn't playfully hold his teammates. His muscles flexed as if he were prepared to choke them should they try and run free. Before he was forced out the door, Zeus turned back and looked at me from across the table. He gave me a single head nod, a weak smile, before he vanished behind the threshold. I smiled back because at least Zeus followed the rule. Thank you.
I was right. You totally smashed it. Everybody give it up again for Cass, whose first reading was amazing. Not surprised at all. And check her out on social media and remember her name. You are going to be getting her book someday. All right. And with that, I want to introduce our second beneficiary of the night. That nonprofit is the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. So you can see here on the screen, and I'll read it out loud so you don't have to squint too much. Their values and principles are really aligned with what we do here at Fight for Our Lives, and we're so excited to get to spotlight this incredible organization that's doing so much work. I'm going to read aloud those values. One is dignity. So we all deserve to have our human dignity and fundamental rights respected. We respect the dignity of all persons. Fairness, laws and policies should be fair and equitable. When liberty or fundamental rights are at stake, all people are entitled to meaningful due process and competent legal representation. Solidarity, we are connected by our common humanity, by global forces that affect our lives, and by historic patterns of oppression, discrimination, and inequity. For society to be just and whole, we must work together to undo systemic oppression in its many forms. Self-determination, society thrives when all people have opportunities to live their lives to their fullest potential. Safety, people and communities thrive when we all feel safe and experience safety. Safety should never be used to justify oppression. And I think we've seen that all too well in the last couple weeks. And inclusion, we see diversity and inclusiveness as a source of strength. And in addition to talking about these values and principles, I just want to highlight some of the actual work that the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project does. So they do impact litigation, stuff that would actually change some laws and legislation that exist. They do community education work. And then perhaps most importantly, they have these direct legal services that serve the community members. So they have specific services dedicated to survivors of domestic violence, to asylum seekers, to families, to children and youth, to people who are seeking citizenship, to the dreamers in DACA, and to people who are maybe being detained or have family who are being detained and at risk of being deported. So I wanted to highlight those so you understand when you give, like, that's the kind of work that your money is going to be supporting. It's the kind of work that can mean the difference between a parent being separated from their child, a parent being sent to jail, being deported. It can mean the difference between one's freedom and one's not. So I really encourage you to give what you can. I know we're all going through a very hard time right now, so totally understand. Give what you're able to, engage how you're able to, and thank you again for sitting and listening and engaging with this material. So with that, I will give it to Dan to introduce our final reader of the night.
Cool. And actually, before I do that, can we just say, Cass, I need to up my photo on for my author photo, because what you got going on here is pretty outstanding. I just wanted to highlight that. That's pretty darn cool. So, all right, cool. All right, last reader, Ever Jones. Ever Jones is a queer trans artist and writer whose third poetry collection, Night Song, was published in 2020 by Sundress Publications. So huge congrats. In a bit, I'll be putting the link to buy Ever's book. They are professor of creative writing at the University of Washington, Tacoma, and are currently in a pod of 8 during quarantine. A year ago, we would have never have guessed what that meant, but here we are. Everyone, please welcome Ever Jones.
This many months into quarantine, and I'm still kind of like, how do you unmute this? my students love me. Hi everyone, my name is Ever. I live here on Duwamish land, right next to the Duwamish River, near a super fun site where hopefully people are working to clean stuff up. That's probably in a general way what these poems are mostly about. And I just want to like lovingly applaud the 4 readers so far. I mean, like Lena, and she knows this. I would give anything to Lena. I think you're one of the global writers of our time, and I'm so happy to be sharing this moment with you. And Cassidy, I just got to meet you and hear your work for the first time tonight, and I'm so excited. And Rob and Ramon, I know I know my partner's like in love with you, and I just loved that story so much. And this is one of those readings, right, where you don't want it to. You're sleepy. I have some friends here on the East Coast, and I know you're sleepy, but like, there's so many things about the reading that you don't want to end. So I'll try to finish us out nicely and serve the group I was with tonight. The poems I'm going to read are almost exclusively from a new collection of work. I published Night Song this year, but I wanted to just kind of bring some new things, because time is hyper leaping at this point, I feel like, and my work is hyper leaping, and I imagine many of yours are too, where you're like, wow, I'm just stretching and reaching further and further and further. So this comes from a manuscript in progress called The Unraveling, which is sort of following the kind of like theme and metaphor of knots, knotting and unknotting and knotting and unknotting. So you'll hear little moments of that. Yeah, and with that, I'll begin. Thanks again for having me. I tried looping one end around the rope's center, but lost your ghost in the eye. I tried a heart loop until your body had no more breath to squeeze. I called this love, or the knot around a wilderness never meant to be kept. Should we learn to lie together our whole lives, we will still be separate weavers. Should we learn to survive, we will practice to stay alive in the veins of our own knots. This next poem I wrote, it's new. I wrote this last week. It's called Spam. I was thinking about spam folders and spam and Wikipedia. Maybe I didn't know, but it had me look up Monty Python's sketch Spam. My brother liked Monty Python, so I didn't. So I have no idea what's going on with Monty Python, but it was funny in the way that it's accumulation. So I'm gonna do the voice for you the best I can. And you're in a diner set in I don't know where, I don't know when. There are Vikings. There are these English, I think, cross-dressers who are dropped in theatrically, and somebody wants to eat, but they don't want spam. And the person who's a cook says, the person says, well, what do you have to eat? And he's like, egg and spam, egg, bacon and spam, egg, bacon, sausage and spam, spam, egg, bacon, sausage, spam. And it just goes on and on until it's like spam, and you just can't imagine ever not eating spam. And I think that's sort of the metaphor that found the heart of this poem. So this is called Spam. If you have something to say, improve your spam score by gaining extra stars. different from a nebula powder keg gathering in the galaxy, something closer to meaning, deeper than a coupon, more penetrating than a newsletter. I clicked the spam folder recently, hoping for a ghost to speak. No one was there, but I starred each message just in case. My grandma Libby was born a Kissling the same year as spam stacked its tiny tin coffins on the shelves of general stores. Her mother's womb nurtured sugar, pork, and preservatives by Hormel, ingredients salty enough to extract her lineage back into muscle memory before the boarding school whip made her mother whisper white. The tin's lid is a living hinge. Peel it away to a whipped curl, mind the sharp edges, drain the excess juice, heat, and serve. Spam is excess, but never enough. It won the Second World War, but never shared its impoverished lessons. Instead, it grew into a colonizer, super influencer, the Paris Hilton of the 50s, filter, but where will all the excess go? Google says you may not want to hear everything the world has to tell you, but spam, bacon spam, said Monty Python in a rural diner with Vikings not asking any questions. I thought that if spam held the secret of long-lasting life, that maybe my grandma would appear there, like trying to save wind in a jar for later, or like the resistor at the diner. Do you have anything without spam in it? No, they all replied when something needed to be said. This is Spring Rain Knot for all those rainy Northwesterners with me tonight. Every water above us now, and time shows its measureless catastrophe, no phenomena of being alive. What kind of love shall we believe in today? There is so much we die trying to know of love, from our home's muted shelters, that when the waters finally break upon us, may we reach our threads toward each other's connection. May we say of the wind, you who brings me ocean, bring me time. You who brings me time, bring me love. This next poem is titled Turfs. I don't know if you know I don't want to call what turfs. I think turf is an ideology, but it's people who believe in it. It stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist. And anyone here who's a feminist or a radical feminist, I don't need to say anything else. You know that a trans exclusionary radical feminist doesn't exist. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense, but these are feminists who reject the existence of trans women, trans femmes, and really any transgendered person, but particularly them, not only in ideology, but also in active legislation. And normally I'm like a very restorative justice type. I do my best, but this is more of a like, fuck you poem. So I just mean this as like a fuck you poem. Turfs. In the apothecary, a white woman wishes for the end of the world. She thinks it'll be a bomb. She is ready, she says, to clean the slate. A figurative expression for erasure, rooted in slate boards that made chalk visible so words and numbers can hold the world in place until someone picks up the eraser. As a child, I thought that chalkboards looked like fields of grass ready for the symbols. The chalk dust were gnats landing in tufts on the tray. This was just before plastic grass and plastic trees and plastic plants, before Radiohead's Rubber Man sold a woman a fake plastic watering can for her plastic plant. The word turf originated to mean tuft of grass, the surface of earth held together by its roots. I wonder if the doomsday woman sits sometimes in grass, the kind that bends for the body, the original memory foam for weather, animals, plants, and even us. In a fake plastic love, we use turf as a verb, to be turfed from your land. In a fake plastic love, they colonize language with plastic flamingos, rubber ducks, and the apathetic rubber of doom, anything to remain less alive. In a fake plastic love, they exclude the body that doesn't fit their politic and root it with fake plastic erasers or turfs. Did you know that the origin of radical is root? And that if we throw out the erasers, what is created are layers above roots? Just imagine the grasses spreading, including, connecting, holding together our world this way. Lovers not. A single thread can have separate parts and catch a god in its circles. Loop one side of the fiber into the sun and draw its end over itself. Every knot begins this way, a circle tied through itself, a light inside. Consider the fledgling looking at the sky, only knowing hunger. Let loose the light in its throat, its life belongs to the planet no matter how it dies. On the other side of the fiber, weave the end through the first circle, then make another knot so loose the ocean can pour through. The lover's knot is made of open spaces. Pull the strings too tight, the thread may snap. And all of this is to say that the body pushes sutures to the surface by isolating and strangling the foreign material from blood and capillaries sent to compost the stitch. This is in the same way that neon is a gas made visible by sealing away other gases, which is why neon is so popular in space and stars so fashionable, which is not exactly unlike the closets of queer people who clad our star bodies with stars, avoiding solidity in neon capillaries, which when you think of it has everything to do with monsters who became history when Pliny the Elder wandered around Caucasia, which was not a home for white people, but a place before race became a wound devoured and sutured, or became a monster, which might be a geography of famine, entire continents of people whose value is predicated on monstrosity, which does not dissolve in the body or flash with light angular as flaming, but is used to light this planet with economy rather than stars. In a, lost my place, I always lose my place right there, in a persistent assimilation of who is worthy of saving. And all of this is just to say that wounds wander bodies ancestor to ancestor, which is why all of us hurt so much, licking open our wounds. And I'll finish with this poem. This is Vibration. Summer kale fledges from the soil, tiny wings, an inch of tender vibration. I hear it as an infant's dragon gurgle during deep moments of sleep, in which every breath is practice for a body under the secular nudge of gravity. A teacher once said to imagine the world as a baby elephant, then dance upon its body, which shaped my movements into undulations of animacy, my body infused with pregnant emptiness, or a sky filled by our desolate meanings. If each thought is a vibration, then we will hum ourselves into songs. Mine will sound as a wing easing into updraft, yours a melody of original tones pouring stars to potions. Together, our songs spiral into teeth and horns, artifacts against apocalypse in this age when our species is dominated by those who still cannot imagine their losses. I press history's knots into my heart, not to hear the past buried secrets, but to be the vibration just above the frequency of our fears. There I am, starlight and sorrow, feet on the ground, kicking a poem into your body. Catch it if you can. Thank you so much.
Oh boy, Ever. This is why poets are cool. You know, the fuck you poem, that should be a new reading series. So someone do that quick. Put it on your to-do list. Ever, before we close out, I want to know what's worth fighting for you on your end in 2021.
Well, hell, just everything. I mean, you know, I thought about this before because I knew I would blank and be silly. You know, things I want to fight for are like joy and love and liberation, you know, especially like I feel like 2021 is a year where I want to fight for the joy of other people as well as the joy of myself. So I'm here for Black joy. I'm here for trans joy. I'm here for Latinx joy. I'm here for Muslim joy, Palestinian joy, intersectional joy, immigrant joy. I just want to be there for those sort of like reimagination of collective trauma into more into celebration, which is I think what this reading was sort of organized to do, this series.
2021, the year of joy. I love that. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for just sharing your work and your wisdom. I know everyone's pretty tired, and I just want to say thank you so much for participating and just being here. And I'm going to pass it on to Ruth, who's going to wrap us up. Don't go away, because we do have a parting gift for all of you. So hang tight.
Yes, thank you, Dan. And thank you all so much for joining us for this reading, for all the past readings. Let's give it up again for our incredible lineup. Lena, Ramon, Rob, Cassidy, Ever. Truly amazing all around. So grateful for you and your work, and for the fact that I'm going to get to keep following your work in the future. Like, keep publishing. I want those poems. I want those books. Thank you all so much. I just wanted to also say, you know, thank you for donating to these beneficiaries. Thank you so much, Jelena, for joining us to talk about Solid Ground. This reading series was all about connecting people, connecting communities, connecting them to nonprofits and organizations, and not letting us be siloed or alone, allowing us to fight together, which is something we so desperately need to do, especially in a pandemic. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I hope that you can give what you can to these nonprofits. And I also just want to say, like, this is the last event, but Fight for Our Lives will continue in spirit in other ways. We have done so many events over the past year, more than I think I could count off the top of my head, something like 7 or 8, raised what I can only imagine is thousands of dollars. DA just put into the chat a link to a website that can show you a little bit more about our past readers and our past beneficiaries. We do have a little YouTube channel for some videos that we've created. We may be putting this up as well on that channel. So keep an eye out, check out all of these organizations, and keep in touch with all of these readers, because they're going to be doing amazing work in the future. And Dan and I will be around, of course, in the community. I'm the writer in residence at Hugo House and working on partnership efforts and anti-racism there. So hopefully we will be doing many, many more things. Rob is nodding. I know we will. Dan has amazing projects going as always. So we are not saying goodbye forever. We're just saying goodbye in this form. With that, bye y'all. Have a good night.